The millionaire CEO stood outside his own restaurant, dressed not in the tailored suit or crisp uniform that the world knew him for, but in a plain navy hoodie, worn jeans, and sneakers. A disguise, intentional in every sense. Darnell Sanders was not here as the celebrated mogul of fine dining, the man who built a culinary empire. Tonight, he was a regular patron, hoping to experience his business through an entirely new lens. The decision to come in this guise wasn't casual. Lately, the world of quarterly reports and polished presentations had started to feel distant. They didn't tell him what really mattered. What about his employees? What about the way they treated customers when no one was looking? Did the principles he preached, respect, empathy, excellence, really take root? The late afternoon sun spilled its golden light into the restaurant as Darnell stepped across the threshold, the door opening to reveal the bustling energy inside. The space hummed with life. Sleek wooden tables lined the floor, surrounded by patrons lost in their meals, deep in conversation. The open kitchen sizzled with action, chefs moving with the practiced grace of those who had done this 1,000 times. Flames flared briefly as a pan met the stovetop, the heat and rhythm of the kitchen unmistakable. But Darnell wasn't here to observe the food, nor the efficiency. He was here to uncover the truth. He joined the line at the counter, keeping his eyes casually on the menu board above, though his heart was racing. Would they recognize him? Would his team be as welcoming, as committed, as he expected? As the minutes ticked by, it became clear no one had a clue who he was. He was just another face in line. The younger cashier greeted customers with a polite, almost distant smile. The air smelled of freshly baked bread, everything seemed fine, almost too perfect. But Darnell wasn't here for perfection. He was here for something deeper, something more real. As the line inched forward, he moved a little closer to the counter, still observing, when two voices caught his attention from behind. The voices were youthful, unmistakable, two boys, probably in their mid-teens, speaking with a high energy that contrasted sharply against the subdued murmur of the restaurant. Darnell kept his eyes fixed ahead, pretending to study the menu, but his ears were locked onto the conversation behind him. "Man, can you believe we're actually eating here? My mom would flip if she knew," one of the boys said, excitement and disbelief thick in his voice. "I know, right?" the other boy responded eagerly. "I heard my brother talking about the owner. He said this place isn't just fancy food, it's like some big deal in the community or something." Darnell's pulse quickened, his name, his identity, spoken casually by two teenagers. "Yeah, dude," the first boy continued, "my cousin said the guy running it, Darnell, he has this program where he helps people get jobs, even if they've had it rough. My brother went through it. He used to struggle, couldn't keep a job anywhere, now he's working steady hours and saving money. Crazy, right?" The words hit Darnell like a wave, unexpected and humbling. To hear his name like that, not in a boardroom or glowing review, but in the casual admiration of two kids, was something else entirely. He'd always hoped his efforts would ripple beyond the walls of his restaurants, but hearing it this way? It was a quiet, proud moment that settled deep in his chest. The first boy chuckled. "Yeah, my family couldn't even think about eating here last year. Things were tight, you know? But now, my dad got a raise, my brother got his job. It feels different." Darnell's chest swelled with pride. This was the heart of what he'd built, a community, a family, people finding hope. It was those very moments that made the long hours and tough decisions worthwhile. He almost turned around to thank them, to shake their hands. To tell them their words reminded him of the why behind it all. But just as he was about to move, the second boy lowered his voice, and Darnell felt the words like a punch. "You know though," the boy said, his tone darker, "my brother said the manager here isn't all that great. Talks down to people. Makes them feel small. Like you mess up one little thing, and that's it. He says a lot of the staff are scared of him." Darnell's stomach dropped. He didn't want to believe it, but the sincerity in the boy's voice hit too close to home. Was it true? Had the culture he worked so hard to build been chipped away by someone so close? His fingers tightened around his phone in his pocket, his mind racing with possibilities. Could it be? Was it possible? But before he could spiral deeper into doubt, the cashier called for the next customer, pulling Darnell back to the present. He walked up to the counter, where the young woman behind it wore neat braids and a name tag that read Maya. She greeted him with a polite, though slightly rehearsed, smile. "Welcome to Urban Harvest. What can I get started for you? Her voice was steady, but distant. Roasted salmon bowl and sparkling water, please, Darnell replied, keeping his tone neutral. Thank you, Maya, he added, his voice warm but casual. The brief flicker of surprise in her eyes didn't escape him. She hadn't expected to be acknowledged by name, and that fact struck him more than it should have. As he stepped aside to wait for his order, his gaze shifted to a man in his late 40s, standing near the kitchen door. Dressed sharply in a tailored shirt and slacks, he exuded authority, though not the kind that inspired admiration. There was something controlling in the way he stood, arms crossed, his brow furrowed in impatience. Darnell didn't need to ask. This man was the manager. The manager turned and barked at a young server, not much older than 20, who had just returned from a table. What did I say about refilling drinks before the table asks? His voice snapped like a whip, loud enough for other customers to turn their heads. The server, clearly flustered, stammered a response. I thought you. You thought wrong, the manager cut him off sharply. We don't waste product like that. Do it again, and we'll have a real problem. Darnell's jaw clenched. The brief moment of embarrassment on the young server's face was undeniable. The server muttered an apology and hurried back to his station, his shoulders visibly slumped. The manager, as though nothing had happened, returned to his post, his demeanor cold and composed. Darnell's order number was called, snapping him back to reality. He retrieved his food and chose a seat in the corner, where he could observe unnoticed. As he ate, his eyes never stopped moving, scanning the room, watching his team. Maya moved quickly and efficiently, but there was something about her smile, it vanished as soon as the customers turned away. The energy in the restaurant had shifted. Darnell wasn't sure he liked what he was seeing. The servers moved quickly, avoiding the manager's gaze at all costs. Their motions were swift but robotic, as if performing a routine they knew all too well. The air felt heavy, thick with unspoken tension. Darnell, who had entered with a sense of pride just hours ago, now sat there, his mind clouded with unease. How long had this been happening? How had he missed all the signs? The thought gnawed at him. But instead of confronting the manager head-on, Darnell chose to stay, blending into the background. He didn't want to rush to judgment. His goal wasn't to humiliate anyone, it was to fix what had gone wrong. So he lingered. His half-eaten meal sat forgotten beside him, the weight of his observations settling in like a stone in his stomach. He knew reacting impulsively wouldn't serve his purpose. He wasn't here to create more problems, he was here to fix what he had unintentionally broken. Over the next hour, Darnell's eyes never stopped moving. He noticed the subtle exchanges between the staff. Their quick glances at the manager, the hurried steps they took when he was nearby, and the hushed whispers that died the moment someone approached. It was a story of fear, a story he couldn't ignore. As the dinner rush began to take over, Darnell knew it was time to act. He stood, adjusting his hoodie, his footsteps purposeful as he moved toward the manager, who was checking his watch by the register. His voice, calm yet firm, cut through the noise of the restaurant. "Excuse me," he said. The manager looked up, his face a mixture of annoyance and curiosity. "Yes? Can I help you?" he asked. Darnell didn't hesitate. His eyes locked on the manager's, unwavering. "I'd like to speak with you in private. It's about how things are running here," he stated. The manager's eyebrows furrowed. "Who are you?" he asked, confusion creeping into his voice. Darnell, without a word, pulled back his hood, revealing his face. The manager's expression shifted instantly, his confident stance faltering. Recognition flashed in his eyes. "I'm Darnell Sanders," Darnell said simply, "the owner of this restaurant." The room seemed to hold its breath. A young cashier froze mid-swipe, and a server, who had been dropping off a tray, hesitated, eyes flicking nervously between them. "Mr. Sanders," the manager stammered, his voice losing its usual sharp edge, "I wasn't expecting you." "That's the point," Darnell replied, his voice even, calm. "I wanted to see how things were when no one knew I was here." He turned and walked toward the back of the restaurant, knowing the manager would follow, though with a much slower, more cautious pace. Inside the office, the tension was palpable. Darnell gestured for the manager to sit, then took his own seat across from him. He didn't waste time. "I overheard some things today," Darnell began, his tone firm but controlled. "Things about how the staff feels when they're working under you. And I watched how you interact with them. To be honest, it's not the culture we've worked so hard to create. The manager opened his mouth to speak, but Darnell raised his hand to stop him. Before you explain, let me ask you this, he said, his voice cool but piercing. Do you believe the way you've been leading is respectful? Does it align with our values? The manager hesitated, his gaze dropping to the desk. I didn't realize. He began, but Darnell interrupted. That's not an answer, he said, his voice low but steady. Do you believe it's respectful? No, the manager admitted quietly, his voice barely audible. Darnell nodded, disappointment flickering in his eyes. This restaurant isn't just a business, he said, the weight of his words settling between them. It's a place where people should feel valued, whether they're eating here or working here. If we lose sight of that, we lose everything. For the next 20 minutes, Darnell outlined his expectations, making it clear that change needed to happen immediately. By the time they were done, the manager's defensiveness had faded, replaced by a reflective silence. When they emerged from the office, Darnell called the staff together. His voice rang out with sincerity, acknowledging the issues he'd observed and promising action. This restaurant is nothing without the people who make it what it is, he said, his words carrying through the room. From the chefs to the servers to the cashiers, each of you matters. If something's not working, I want to hear about it. My door is always open. The staff exchanged uncertain glances, their guarded expressions softening ever so slightly. But as Darnell left the restaurant that night, he knew the work was far from over. The real test would be whether these changes would stick. Later that night, Darnell sat alone in his quiet home office, the dim glow of his desk lamp casting long shadows across the room. A framed picture of his late mother sat on the corner of his desk, her warm smile a reminder of why he'd started this journey. She had always believed in treating people with dignity, no matter their station in life. Darnell couldn't shake the images of the staff from earlier, Maya's fleeting smile, the young server's embarrassment, the subdued energy that hung in the air. How had he allowed it to drift so far from the vision he had worked so hard to build? He opened his laptop, fingers hovering over the keys. He didn't just want to address the manager he'd spoken to earlier. He wanted to reach every manager across his restaurant chain. He began drafting an email, reiterating the core values of the company, announcing plans for an anonymous feedback system, employee satisfaction surveys, and leadership training programs. He knew that words alone weren't enough. Action was required, and he wasn't going to let today's revelations fade away into nothing. Once he hit send, Darnell leaned back in his chair, staring up at the ceiling. He thought about the two boys from the restaurant. Their words had sparked something deep inside him, a sense of accountability that went beyond profits and metrics. His restaurants weren't just about serving good food, they were about serving people, uplifting communities, and creating opportunities. Weeks later, Darnell returned to the restaurant. This time, he didn't wear his hoodie disguise. He entered the space, and immediately, something felt different. The atmosphere was lighter, the smiles from the staff more genuine. Meyer greeted him with enthusiasm. The young server moved with confidence, and even the manager seemed more approachable. As Darnell stepped toward the counter, he heard a familiar voice call out to him. "Hey, Mr. Sanders!" It was one of the boys from that night, now sitting with his family at a corner table. He waved Darnell over, his grin wide. "Thanks for what you do," he said. Darnell smiled back, his heart swelling with pride. "No," he replied, his voice steady. "Thank you. You reminded me why I do it." The experience had changed him, not just as a businessman, but as a person. Leadership, he realized, wasn't about standing above others. It was about standing with them. And so, Darnell committed himself to leading with his heart, ensuring that every person in his company felt seen, heard, and valued. Life's greatest success, he understood now, isn't measured by wealth or accolades. It's measured by the positive impact you leave on others.